Hey, Greg. Welcome to Mass Construction Show.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the ride in from Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
Just over the border, though, right? Not too far.
Yeah, not too far.
Yeah, nice. All right. So, anytime someone's a consultant, me being one of them, I think it's helpful to kind of understand, what do you do? What do you consult people on from a high level kind of thing?
Sure. I'm probably best to be described as a scheduling or claims consultant. So what I do is not so much the scheduling on a month-to-month basis for contractors or projects, but when the project has a difficulty, whether it be a delay or a claim, there's usually a forensic schedule analysis where we go back and we try to figure out sort of what happened, where the delays occurred, what could have happened, what did happen, and ultimately who's responsible. And oftentimes that's in a context of either a dispute between the parties or a litigation if lawyers have already been got involved. So once we do the analysis, oftentimes we end up being either part of the resolution by either being an advocate for our client to explain our perspective and why certain aspects of what our client believes are justified, or we actually become a witness in a litigation as an expert on the scheduling and the costs that result from them.
Okay. Now, so are you exclusively scheduling, or is that 80% of what you do? What's the...
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I look at it is, I've been in the industry for over 3 decades, and I've had a number of different positions with a number of different kinds of companies. And so I look at it as helping clients resolve problems, whether they're existing or they've already happened, and now we're trying to resolve them afterwards. And anyone in construction knows many, if not most, of the disputes in the claims and the litigation have a scheduling piece, right? The project's delayed, it's accelerated, it's disrupted, it's terminated. All those things kind of go back to the schedule. And so when there is a dispute, it usually involves some piece of scheduling. We've had some jobs where we've helped people, manage a particular piece during the project. We've had some resolved over interpretation of specifications that didn't have a delay piece, but almost predominantly the disputes that we get involved with have a piece, if not a very large piece, that's related to schedule.
Your background's pretty unique. You were an engineer, worked for a state DOT.
Yep.
You're also an attorney
Yep.
as well, so you're crossing the construction side and the legal, which I think is pretty rare. Yeah. I often found it funny that a lot of construction attorneys don't even know how to read drawings. And you're like, okay, well, those are contract documents. You don't know how to read the contract. Like, how are you an attorney for? But that's a whole nother conversation. And then, what phase then do you typically get involved? Because if I think it's at a claims mitigation thing, that's at the end of the project. Are you ever getting in earlier, or when does a phone call get made to you to say we have a problem?
Sure. I think the majority, probably 80% of the time I get involved with projects when they're close to closing out, or they're done. And then the other probably 20%, and those aren't hard numbers, but a small percentage are when a project has had a significant delay issue or acceleration issue, and the team needs some assistance. And there's a variety of ways we can help in that regard. And then, maybe 5% of that is we get involved up front. And, I don't provide legal services, but what I've done on a number of jobs is looked at the contract from an operational point of view and said, like, how is your decision-making set forth in here? How is your documentation? What are you requiring? Are you requiring the correct things? Is your change order process make sense? I mean, it's typically pretty standardized, but when something goes wrong, does your specification, does your contract provide an alternative to resolve that? Or do you get just stuck where, there's a loggerheads thing? And so I've been involved in a number of jobs where, typically on the owner side, because they're trying to set up the contract, they're trying to set up the decide what delivery method. I've been involved. Greg, what's your opinion on this particular job? Is it a CM? Is it a design build? Is it a hard bid GC situation? But that's a small piece. And then from that point, usually because of my involvement up front, I become sort of an ad hoc. Hey Greg, we got this situation. Can you just offer your advice, whether it be about scheduling or just disputes in general?
Okay. Now, I think the value of having you sitting down and talking to us is there's a lot of people listening, and you're usually brought in when things have gone bad, right? There's that 5% where let's do it right. But from your experience, both as an attorney and in-house counsel for companies, that type of stuff, and I think law firms where you were hired by contractors and subcontractors, you've seen a lot of the end result with problems and large costs and delays and all this other kind of stuff. How do we not end up there? Like that's kind of my goal with this. And I think you were helpful. I put some ideas down there and you added a couple more. So if we don't want to end up in this place where we're dealing with a claim and trying to do forensic scheduling, right? Whatever that means. I understand what it means, but okay, so we're going to go back and try and figure out what happened, right? With sometimes good information, sometimes probably lousy information or poor documentation, and then it gets really ugly and probably costly. What could we do in the buckets? Maybe we start with is contractually. What would be some of the things you would say to people contractually to prevent ending up in a claim situation?
Sure. As you mentioned, I was general counsel for a large subcontractor for almost 10 years. And what I found there was the most effective way to avoid problems is upfront, choosing the right jobs, estimating, contract provisions, those sorts of things. But a larger portion of the way to avoid problems is in the project management side of things, in the administrative, in the organizational side, from a contractor, from an owner's point of view. So to start with, from a contractual point of view, one of the things that I used to do was negotiate, and I've negotiated hundreds of construction contracts, design contracts, things of that nature. Realistically, there's a half a dozen clauses, maybe 7 or 8, that are truly meaningful in the negotiation, right? Things like no damages for delay. Many jobs have delays. And if you as a contractor or subcontractor can recover nothing but time, you may be in a real big problem down the road. Usually, and that's no damage for delay if it's the owner or if it's the upstream party's fault. That's kind of inequitable. So that was, where I worked, we were a large company. We were able to get those stricken or at least modified in majority. Smaller shops, it's a little harder to get those. Yeah. And so, easy to say, well, don't take those jobs, but that's not realistic. So there has to be a real emphasis during the project of being aware that things are sliding, catching them very early, being proactive, saying, hey, there are costs to this. Hey, we need this resolved. Again, not a silver bullet by any matter of means, but that would be an example. Another one's pay when paid versus pay if paid. That changes from state to state and type to type and public and private, and there's statutes. So, that one's a hard one to get involved with. But that was another one that we kept our eye on. We would look at the ownership of the schedule and particularly changes of the schedule. We were a subcontractor. So it was in curtain wall, so it's a very particular a particular trade with a long lead time from design to manufacturing to installation. And a lot of contractors and owners wouldn't quite understand it's not the same as many other trades where you can shift, okay, do that side of the building. Well, no, we didn't design it. We haven't finished that part of the building. We haven't manufactured that part. So control of the schedule was very important to us. And so language that said, changes in the schedule will be made by the general contractor and you subcontractor will abide by them. no expense or, things of that nature. We would have to say, we would like it to be that we would approve it or accept their changes, or that there would be some sort of mutual discussion, because that's another one that you can get yourself into a hot water just based on what's in the contract. And, as I say, it's sometimes very difficult to know. I don't think any of those provisions are unusual in construction, maybe a little less so in the owner to general contract, but certainly general contractors to subs, those are pretty standard. I think, I could go on a few more, but I think that those are, I always felt that you had to have some way, long existing relationship with the owner or the upstream party where they would be willing to modify it. If you are just bidding it, it's a low bid and you have the low price and you go in, particularly if it's a public job, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. Right. In some states, that's stuff's legal or not legal. So, there's a little bit of protection from the statutory point of view. But I feel like it's more a decision made on whether you take that job. I'll give you a very simple example. We had a job one time and liquidated damages. This is 15, 20 years ago, and the liquidated damages were $50,000 a day. Yep. And I think our contract was only $30 million. So we did some quick math. Our estimating department said, that's not a problem, until I said, well, multiply that out by 30 days. Multiply that by 60 days. Have we had a job that hasn't gone 30 or 50, 60 days late? Some, but it's pretty regular. I'm not talking 100-day. I'm not talking a year delay. And the numbers added up really quickly. And so we decided that was not a job based upon, if it was a $100 million job, it would have been a little bit different calculus. And so, we made the choice on that one not to go forward because of the contract. It's a hard decision, and, we didn't make many that happened. But sometimes when you see something really egregious or the potential gain on profit can get wiped out in 2 weeks of a delay.
Yeah, there's just a tremendous amount of risk.
Exactly.
And the risk reward is probably calculation starts leaning too heavily to risk.
Yeah.
Do you have?
I was just going to say the one piece of advice I would give on the contractual side is, I heard this somewhere a long time ago, and the acronym stuck with me, and it was RTFC, which is read the contract.
We can swear in this. Read the fucking contract.
read the fucking contract.
Yeah.
I am amazed how many people in the operational side, project management and otherwise, that have not read the contract and just assume it's the same as other. Now, I understand that contracts are very cumbersome. They're hard to read. They, are conflicting within them, et cetera. What I used to do, our department, we used to do a one-sheet cheat sheet for all our project managers on the contract. So notice dates and how processes work and what markup is and who notices go to and all the things that are, tripwires that we had run into problems in the past. But there's really no excuse for being a project manager on a project and having not read at least the general conditions and the scope of work, right? They usually read the scope of work, but at least read the general conditions in the agreement. And if you don't understand it, seek someone, a higher up, one of the executives, maybe you have outside or inside counsel, and understand certain pieces of it, because I find sometimes there's a shock later on in the project when, we couldn't do that. We didn't have the right to do that, or they can do that. Where does it say that? Because any contract is really nothing more than just two people agreeing to terms. So they look alike from one to one, but there's a lot of differences.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because I have to imagine a lot of times a PX or some other senior person in the firm looks at the contract as part of that back and forth process about, oh, hey, we don't like this. We're going to strike this. We're going to strike that. But forget even the PM. What about the APM and the field? Like, in reality, everybody should be reading that contract, and as a super, I remember you'd be focused on the, Schedule B or whatever it was about, how many man hours of time is devoted for this and for that. How much should we buy for this? How much of an allowance for that? Like, you'd look at that stuff, but you weren't looking at the rest of the contract.
Well, and nowadays, I mean, AI makes things a lot easier, and it may not be 100% accurate, and it may not get everything you need, but if you can use that, I mean, that's the problem used to be hey, it's going to take me an hour, it's going to take me 2 hours to read this, and I'm not going to understand it.
Now you can have the cliff notes.
That excuse is kind of going away very quickly. So.
Yeah, but I think that should also be incumbent upon the PX or the in-house counsel, whoever, to say,
absolutely,
hey, here's our project. These are the things you need to be focused on. This is where the contract is different from what we're usually. But I don't know if that conversation's happening.
I haven't seen that happen very often in either the companies that I've worked with as an employee or companies I've worked with as a consultant. I don't think that happens very often. And what I've always told, and in the companies I worked at, I tried to make sure that the younger project managers got it right early, so that because habits stick. And I would say, one of the jobs is you have to know this better than anyone else. It will come in handy. And I had people come back 2 years later saying, you know what, Greg, I was in a meeting and I was the only one that knew that the contract said X or the spec said X, and we were able to do this better or whatever, So, but yeah, I think that for a lot of decision makers, it's whether you take the job or not based on the contract if you can't change it. But for most of the people that are actually working on the job, it's making sure you understand what somebody upstream, someone earlier in the process has come to an agreement on or accepted as the Bible of the job, and so you have to work within it. So
yeah. Do you have any thoughts around, you mentioned the pay when paid and all that kind of stuff. I know in Massachusetts we have prompt pay. But it seems like that is not really, it's not realistic. And for folks that don't know, prompt pay is that you need to be, paid within a certain amount of time. And if you wreck and there's a disagreement with it, they have to respond within X amount of time. And if they don't respond in X amount of time, then they owe you the whole thing, right? It's pretty lopsided in favor of the person putting the requisition in.
That's correct.
But if I have a working relationship, I'm a subcontractor, I do a lot of jobs with, ABC company. If I use that, okay, I kind of feel like it's you win the battle, but you're going to lose the war, right?
Yeah,
in the long term, are they going to want to work with you again?
It depends, right? And I think this is one thing that a lot of people don't maybe appreciate is that there are contractual requirements or contractual terms. And what you do with them is oftentimes based on things like relationships. So, for example, if I was running a company in Massachusetts, I would set up a standard. I'd probably computerize it. The invoice went out. I think it's 12 days they have to respond back, whatever the number of days is, right? I would set up some computer thing that a very short, not threatening, but more of a notification. Hey, we sent this in and we haven't, pursuant to the clause. This is, and I would literally just quote it, right? Please contact us for payment. Now, once you systematize it, right, that gives your people that are interacting with the other side say, yeah, this is what the state put into the statute. We're notifying you. If they say, look, we didn't get paid, we'll pay you next week, most people are going to say, okay.
Yeah.
If it's going on 90 days and you have a good relationship, going 120, going 180, maybe that good relationship isn't what it is, but at least you've put the flag in the ground and done it in a way that isn't, threatening. It isn't relationship destroying. And so then it allows one more step to sort of get a response back. Or if you get no response, right, then what? And so I think that I was always with project managers saying the tone that you write your emails, the tone you write your change order requests, the tones you write in your letters come through. And they can be oftentimes much more negative to what you're trying to accomplish than just a straight factual, here's the details and this is where it leads, rather than, I see people saying, you're not acting in good faith, right? I mean, everybody either laughs at that or the hairs in the back of their neck go up and they get a I'm coming back at you attitude, right? So why say it?
Right.
Why say it's not going to help you,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that piece is what the statute says allows for certain things. I would follow the statute to a T, mechanize it, I would set it up, and then what people do with that, it can be determined based on a more relationship or other basis.
Yeah, and I like that systemification of it, because then it also gives the person that has the relationship with this, oh, that's just boilerplate. Right. Oh, don't worry about it. It's just boilerplate.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, okay. And they see that everyone has it on it. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's just their standard thing that they send. It's not I'm putting you on notice letter, even though it is, but it doesn't come across as.
Well, it gives you the hook if things don't go the way they quote unquote should, or the way you think they will. Right. Because if you do that, it just makes your case better. If, say, the other company is having financial issues, maybe they're being bought and there's a different mentality of payments. There's also maybe they're in trying to squeeze every dime out of people, and they've got a good face, and we're good relationship and all this other stuff. I don't know. I don't take I've worked on the owner side. I've worked on the contractor side. I don't have a favorite, a home team, so to speak. So there's a whole lot of reasons why you might not be getting paid in accordance with the statute. But I do find a lot of the big established general contractors and CMs, they're usually on the day before it's supposed to, comes out with what they should the whole purpose of the statute here in Massachusetts.
All right, so that's from the contractual side of things. Now, really in your wheelhouse, scheduling. What would be some good practices that you would say from a scheduling perspective to both on the very front end and then maybe even managing the schedule throughout the project? Like, what would you say would be some good advice for folks?
I mean, I think that from the scheduling side of things, I think the thing that I see as often disconcerting to me in a dispute and in progress of the job is a disconnect between the scheduling and the project management, right? And so I see a lot of companies that maybe don't have in-house scheduling, and so they use a consultant, and they pay them $500 or $1,000 a month, and they send them last month's schedule, and they say, okay, now this has gone from 50% to 60%, or we're going to do this on this date. They send it back, the schedule comes in, it goes in. And then you go look at the meeting minutes, and that's not what they're planning on doing. They say, well, no, we're not going to be on the 13th floor because there's a problem there. We're going to be up on the 15th and the 16th, and we'll come back and do the 13th. And so their schedule is a contractual check in the box. It's not a tool to allow them to build the project. And when that happens, it gets very difficult in the dispute side to prove what your intention was. I think when those are hand in hand, and to me that usually means the superintendent is involved, right? That's who I want to talk to, right?
Absolutely.
And it may not be 5,000 activities or 1,500 activities in a schedule. I mean, I joke and I say I like to, when I'm first getting involved with a job, is I'd like some of my junior schedulers, I say, give me a superintendent's view of the job, and they all know what I mean by that is, okay, I'm building the bridge, okay, demo. Piers and abutments, steel, superstructure, roadway, right? And when are those going to happen, right? Because that's, obviously I'm not putting them down. I think that their way of thinking of it, and then each one of those gets broken down, But I think what ends up happening is when the project team is doing it as a contractual requirement, not as this is how we're building the project, this is how we're thinking about, oh, can we change this around? Can we do this? Oh, this picks up a little bit of time. Those sorts of things. I think that's, the biggest thing that I see that could help projects actually progress forward without having problems.
So really alignment between the schedule and reality is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which
is hard, which is very hard.
Yeah. Are you seeing like look ahead schedules that are disjointed from the contractual schedule?
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that usually signals to me that the look-ahead schedules are coming out of the superintendents and the foremen.
Yes.
And the schedule is coming out of the project management, and there's some disagreement. It might be a little bit, it might be a lot.
Yeah. So it's another disjointed thing, right?
Right. And let's be honest, we've probably all been on projects where the superintendents and the foremen and the project managers are not hanging out.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it's
and that has to happen to have a well-run project. So I think that percolates up into scheduling and probably other things that are going on.
Okay. And then how about change orders getting integrated? So whether you want to call them subnets or fragnets, and like, any thoughts around?
Yeah,
that?
I think that's that's a very good practice. Is that your schedule is a living and breathing tool, right? It helps you proceed forward. It documents going backwards. And so when you have a change order, or you have, and it might not even be a change order, it might just be a particular issue. I think that I've seen schedules where every single RFI is put into the schedule. Okay, probably overkill, because we all know many of them are see the drawings, or okay, it's 16 inches or whatever it is, right? But I think that there has to be a little bit of a filtering of that. If it's actually going to impact, or it may impact, then we can't foresee exactly where these are all going to go. That should definitely be put in. And different schedulers are going to have different methodologies for doing it. Separating it out. As you say, different fragnets, PCO this, or RFI that, or change order this, those sorts of things. But the key is just to make sure that they get tied back into the other work, which sounds dumb, because I would think that you would have to do that as a scheduler. But I have seen some where it's like totally separate and it doesn't really impact the top, which, that's just bad scheduling, I guess.
Do you have any examples of where you saw those bad practices result in problems?
Well, I think that what happens is
just so somebody can kind of imagine that, because I guess on the face level, you want your schedule to actually match what you're doing on the job, right? But
I'll give you an example. Yeah. So I had a job. It was a bridge project. It was a municipal DOT. We were working on behalf of the DOT, analyzing the contractor's schedule, and it became very important, particular phase, phase 3, when was phase 3 going to happen? And the schedule was saying, it's going to happen now. And on that job, they did 6-week look-aheads. And so we went back to and that date, then just started to slide as it got too close. It was a month out. So every month it was a month.
Just keep pushing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so we thought, well, was that realistic? So we went back to the 6-week look-aheads, which were a little bit further, and figured, well, we should see it in each one of these. And the phase 3 never showed up until 6 months later. Yet they were claiming, oh, we got delayed here. Now, in and of itself, that could possibly be explained, but there were a lot of circumstances where the differences. There were many other differences between what the superintendent and the foreman were putting together and then talking about in the superintendent's meeting every week, and then what was going on in the OAC meeting that the project managers were attending. And it was like two different groups of people talking. And so for us, we were, it's a municipality, it's public tax dollars. You're trying to, maximize the benefit to the residents that are paying, but you want to pay what's legitimately, required. But it got to the point where we just literally had to say, like, honestly, we think probably the superintendent schedules were more realistic, because we matched up what they were predicting in those 6 weeks with what actually happened. Shorter time horizon, I get that. We just found those to be more legitimate, and we ended up basically discounting these schedules that were quite large and intricate and complex, but they didn't really help them prove their delay claim.
Yeah, so they lost their claim. Presumably.
I mean, they got paid. Right,
they got a percentage of what they were claiming.
Exactly. They could have supported it a lot better. And I don't mean to say that every job we look at there's this discrepancy. A lot of them, it's exactly the same, because in a well-run schedule project management superintendent situation, you have your big schedule, P6 or whatever, and then from there you can pull out your next 4 week, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is. The superintendent says, that's not the way I'm doing it. I'm not doing that, because superintendents know a little bit different stuff than project managers. They each have different roles. And so usually there should be a check with that. And we find in a lot of cases, I'd say most cases, that's not a problem. But it does come up on occasion.
Okay. Any project management?
Oh, yeah. To avoid disputes?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's good.
Because I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably the bulk of people listening, the majority, maybe it's only, 55%, but I'd say most listeners are probably a good chance they're a project manager. So this will be helpful.
Yeah. So I think that, I'm not going to put on a class of project management 101, but the keys that I see is communication, organization, and management, right? Management of all that. So communication, I see a lot of times where, and again, I've seen all the bad stuff, and I'm trying to use that to advise on not running into it. A lot of communication that is delayed. And I've been a project manager. I know most project managers don't have enough time. I know I never did when I was a project manager. And it's difficult because the way I look at it is any given week I'd have 30 things I need to get done. But at the end of the day, 2-3 years down the road, 1 or 2 of them was probably really, really meaningful. But you don't know which one it is. Right? Yeah. Besides payment, yes. Pay ups is always top of the list as far as priority. But no, what I mean by communication is, there will be, because we go back and we look at the emails, we look at the letters, we look at the meeting minutes, we look at all that stuff, and what we'll see is somebody says, hey, I need an answer to this, or we think this is going to happen, and then it looks like it falls off the radar, and then 2 months later, something will come up, and someone say, oh yeah, we asked about that, and it's like, okay, but maybe that needed to be pursued a little bit more. Again, we look at it oftentimes in hindsight to see that sort of thing. And so I guess I'd say if there's, a, again, systematized way of doing it, right? We all have PCO logs and RFI logs, right? Some have risk registers, what's going on. That's maybe not one of those exactly, but we know that there's a problem coming up. If you don't have some sort of tracking to say, okay, it's another biweekly meeting, another weekly meeting, and these are the things that we need to get done. For example, what I used to do after I did it for a little while was I would pick a day of the week, I would send a simple email and just say, just want to remind you, these items are open, bullet point, and it'd be some PCOs, it'd be some RFIs, it'd be, need to understand what the owner wants to do with this, waiting on design for this, right? And yeah, sometimes people got pissed off and said, why are you doing this? You're trying to cover your ass and, you're papering the file and all that sort of stuff. And we said, no, we want solutions. Every time you solve this, it comes off. We don't need it. But we're doing this so that everyone is aware of what's going on. And those sometimes are very helpful. I think that the communication is also, there's a piece of it to, we mentioned earlier about how what you write and the tone, right? It should usually just be factual. And one of the things that is very helpful, certainly in the dispute side of things, but certainly persuading someone at the time, is explain why they should feel that way, why they think. I see so many project managers submit change orders, and they say, here are the costs. There's a whole bunch of data, and there's maybe an email back there, there's maybe a couple pictures. What happened? Put 2 sentences that say there was a design issue that resulted in an RFI, which then there was a drawing change, which this is extra work. Facially, some decision maker is going to look at it and go, okay, this is
that's substantiated.
Instantly, they're thinking, okay, this is probably legitimate, right? We were out there, another sub jumped in front of us, or the owner didn't make a decision. We notified them, here's the 6 letters that we sent them waiting for a decision, and now they made it. Unfortunately, the cost has gone up. Unfortunately, the lead time has gone up, right? Use those opportunities in PCOs is a good example, but just in trying to negotiate or trying to push things along. Because I found as a project manager on the contracting side, you're always trying to push someone and they always seem to be slower than what you need. And so the 2 ways to avoid that is to look ahead. What are you going to need in a month, in 2 months? How's your procurement? What decisions do you need? That's hard, but that's certainly, there should be some process to it. And then the second is when it does percolate to the surface, you have to really be on them, whoever them is, the design team, the owner or contractor, another trade, what have you, to try to get those things resolved. I don't think I'm saying anything that's rocket science, but I'm just telling you that when I look at disputes, oftentimes I'm looking at a job right now, and there was a particular sign off that needed to happen. And I asked the client, well, you sent it in. They said, we'll do it once you revise it, and you didn't revise it for 8 months.
Yeah.
Okay, you had a lot of float, so you had some time, but by the time you sent it in, it was a hair on fire. We need this right away. Was there anything that prevented? And, I think the answer might be no, but I don't know the answer yet. If it could have been done 2 months after, then you may have picked up 6 months if everything else still took that time after it got back. Those sorts of things. Again, I'm looking at it through hindsight. I'm seeing what was important and not the other 80%, 90% that wasn't important, that did get done on time, that was discussions, that was, pushed forward. I think, if I were to go back to be a project manager again, I'd be very, very organized as far as what's on the table, what's on the radar, what's coming up. We see a lot of times with procurement, I read meeting minutes a lot. What's the situation with this long lead item? Well, they told us last week, or they told us 2 weeks ago that it'll be in next week. Okay, have you talked to them in the last 2 weeks? I mean, yeah, I know sometimes it's hard to get a hold of people, but a quick phone call. Hey, we still on? Oh, you have some problem? Now it's going to be 4 weeks from now? Crap. Those sorts of things.
Yeah. So it sounds like in a lot of those cases that communication is a consistency as well as how it's crafted, what's in the communication, but then the consistency, because you started with, oh yeah, we mentioned that in an email or something once, and then never brought it up again. And I can see in hindsight where someone says, okay, well, if this was so critical and it was holding up the job for 7 months, it only warranted one email.
Right.
Without any follow-up. It couldn't have been that critical if you didn't bother ask again or say anything again.
Well, the analogy that's popped into my head at times is, I don't know anything about the, counter surveillance of terrorists and things like that. But like, for example, 9/11, apparently after it happened, they could go back and say, well, there was this one transmission here and there was this one, communication here, and so-and-so bought this here and such. And so they should have, quote unquote, connected the dots. And when they show it that way, it seems like, gosh, what happened? Someone should have seen that. And what they did is they took away, the 9,000 other dots that those are in, which is exactly your point. If it's important, if it's going to have a negative impact, it has to go up. It has to be stressed. It has to be in the meeting minutes. It has to be in the emails, right? I mean, you don't have to be an ass about it, but if, squeaky wheel gets the grease to some extent.
Yeah. And because then you look at the inverse of somebody looking back at a job and says, if like, let's say it's a general contractor that was communicating and they, have an RFI, they have it in the meeting minutes running for 18 weeks and they sent, 9 emails, then the person doing the forensics looking back is saying, okay, like after how many emails were you going to do something about this, right? Like,
yeah, no, exactly.
You know what I mean? And how many times did it come up in the, the weekly meeting? Like at what point was this going to register you that it was important? Like the optics of that versus if this was critical for 7 months of schedule, like a one-off email about it that never got followed up, like why would the owner assume this was that important if that's the level of
absolutely
communication around it?
And 2 points. One is not just for how does it look in the dispute, but if you're saying that every week and you're writing emails and when you're on site, you're saying, hey, we really need an answer to that sort of thing. In real time, you're going to get an answer fast.
Yes.
Knock on wood, not always, but you should. And then the second thing is I don't advise the exact same thing, the exact same wordage every single meeting, because my perspective usually means, do they talk about it? Because we all know they take last month's meeting minutes.
Old business and just,
was it, so, just is in the same way with your communication, you should ramp it up. Okay, this is a concern. Okay, we need an answer. Okay, this is going to impact the schedule. Okay, this is really, there is a drop deadline on such a date that we need this. It is impacting the schedule now. It is costing us money. You know, like if
It's
it
now on the
ramps
critical
up, then
path.
everything
It's
you
now-
just said is like times 2, right? But yeah, absolutely.
But then I like your point about, yes, from a claim standpoint, that's all excellent. But just from a project management standpoint, you're probably not going to end up in a claim if you're doing that anyway, because people are going to be more likely to be on top of everything.
Right.
Yeah. Now, in fairness to everybody listening, like, we don't live in a perfect world.
Of course.
Right? And you're doing 900 things a week.
Yeah.
So that's not to say like, oh, just why don't you just do that? Like, oh yeah, okay, well.
Oh no,
you know.
no. Absolutely, I agree 100%. I'm actually, you know, I look at project managers and I never think to myself, man, these guys are terrible as a lot, right? Most project managers are great, right? I mean, there's in any industry, there's going to be people that are not doing as well at the bottom, and that's no different in construction. But I think all I'm trying to stress is, you know, if in your making 1,000 decisions a week, you can say, and this is why I say systematize it, right? Be organized, because then it's easier for you. Because if you have to go find like, oh yeah, there was like a couple of things. What were they? I mean, I always used to have a piece of paper and just keep it in my pocket because I knew that I wouldn't lose it on my phone or all this other stuff. And so, yeah, you make your system so it's easier for you to remember what needs to be done is probably, I guess, the big picture.
Yeah. So those are all the, you know, components of potential like kind of issues. Is there anything as a whole organizationally that would be helpful to kind of mitigate things? So not, you know, not the super or the schedule or the PM, but from a corporate standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, and again, I'm not saying anything that's shocking here, but, you know, if there is pressure from above, you know, vice presidents, regional managers, CEOs, CFOs, whatever, on things that, you know, are not good practices, then that's going to be very, very difficult for the project team to work together. I think there needs to be a sense of trying to, and I'm not trying to suggest that people have like ulterior motives or something, but I know that at the higher levels there are different, you know, there are different motivations for things, and you know what I found that is if you have an effective project review process, right? I know a lot of companies have monthly project reviews, quarterly project reviews, what have you. I also know that a lot of them, project manager comes in, he puts a bunch of numbers, okay, we're here, and then we're doing that, and everyone goes, oh, okay, it's lunchtime, and we move on. You know, I tended to be the guy that said, well, wait a minute, how come the margin went down this month, or how come, you know, what we haven't been paid in 3 months? What's going on with that? Oh, I'm working on it. Well, what does working on it mean? Right? You know, those kind of hard questions, because then I think, you know, people realize like this isn't just, because if you're just checking a box, you don't need a meeting. You could just send an email, right? Here's the report, done, right? And you know, I know companies that do it that way. Here's the report, and then when something comes up, you know, one of the executives, somebody in the leadership team says, "Hey, I think we need a meeting because this one looks like it's going off track," you know, for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, and I have to imagine there's some trust level in there that you might trust a certain project manager that, you know, okay, well, this project's okay, that person's there, we know they have the experience, they have the knowledge, but if there's someone that's an unknown, okay, well, those questions can't slide with this person because they're an unknown entity, and let's focus, you know, having been sent to a job that was a problem job, and you're like, how did it get this far down a hole, you know, and you get the call like, hey, can you go out there and try and like straighten this out, or at least put eyes on this, tell me what's going wrong. And, you know, you really sit and think like, man, how did this get, you know, we're supposed to be at the finish line and now the flag's going up. So when you give that example, I have to imagine when those quarterly or monthly meetings were happening about projects, it was, yeah, the lip service was happening. Yeah, oh yeah, we're okay out there. There's a little bit of problem, but we're okay. We're okay. Because the project manager is not going to want to say, no, oh, it's fucked up and I fucked it up. Right? Like,
nope.
So, yeah, those hard questions almost have to happen, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be adversarial. I mean, I think that, I was always trying to make sure that everyone understood what the risks were, right? We had a job and it hadn't been paid in 6 months. And I did. I didn't go to all the project reviews, but, I went to a project review as general counsel and said, okay, when are we getting paid? That was the only question I asked. It devolved into a 15-minute conversation. And now we understand that the company's got financial problems and they might go bankrupt. I said, oh, guys, we were doing a lot of money a week.
You think you would have want to led with that?
Right. And again, I'm not tooting my horn here. I think that these kind of questions, right? And you're right. You have project managers, project execs that have shown a track record that we all know it's construction. There's things that come up and they were able to resolve them. You give them a little bit more leeway. Maybe somebody that's transferred over, or someone that's more junior taking the next step up, getting his own job. You have to ask those questions because he doesn't know, or you don't know what their practice is. But I think that my thought was always an eyes open perspective, right? This isn't a let me come in and tell you my job is awesome every single month, right? Because it's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, I don't know a job out there that does that. So, and then as a team, maybe we can work on something. And I had situations where, the CFO said, well, I know their regional manager. I'll give them a call, ask them if we get payment to see if we can get a little bit more, or, understand why we can't get the design team to give us an answer, or, whatever the issue was that came up. Sometimes in talking about it in a larger forum, there's other opportunities to skin the cat a different way.
Okay. So despite all of our best practices, we end up in a claim. I think a nice thing to, it's usually delays, right, that are the cause of claim. Maybe it's a workmanship issue, but that oftentimes becomes an insurance claim, and is it a defective product versus? So taking that stuff aside, delays seem to be the issues. Could you maybe first explain to people, liquidated damages versus actual damages for delay?
Sure. So liquidated damages is a relatively simple concept. And essentially, in an owner-contractor contract, the owner will say, you have 1,000 days to do the job. And for every day after 1,000 that you haven't hit substantial completion or final completion, whatever they choose, you're going to pay me $3,000, $10,000, $150, whatever it is.
Casino job, $1 million.
Right, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Right. They're one of the few businesses that justifies it on the dollars and the cents, right? So, and as I say, it's relatively simple. That's what it is. But what ends up happening is that now, as the project is going on, every time there's a delay, it has to be determined who's responsible for it, right? Because if you get a time extension, whether it's an excusable delay, weather or something else, going on, pandemic perhaps, things like that, then that would hold off the assessment of liquidated damages. But if you are responsible, meaning the contractor, then you wouldn't get a time extension and you would be responsible for those liquidated damages. The difference between liquidated damages and actual damages is that when you have an actual damage, which basically just means that there's no liquidated damages clause in the contract. Essentially it says, if you breach this contract by not getting it done in the time period that is specified, then you have to pay for the owner's cost. And there's a myriad of things that, I think people understand owners are going to have costs if the project goes late. The difference is with liquidated damages, if they're written well, most courts interpret them as not something that you have to prove you actually expended. Because the concept is, here we are on the front end of the job. If it's 6 months or 6 years, and we are estimating as best we can what the cost will be. From an owner's point of view, you're going to have, additional AE costs. You're going to have maybe your CE&I. You're going to have, maybe you have to rent buildings if you have people moving them, storage. Maybe you have vendors that are providing you FF&E, and you have to store that, or you have to tell them to hold off. There's a variety of things, and so you make an estimate. and you say, as best I can tell now, it's going to be that dollar value, and the parties agree to it and it goes in the contract. And so there isn't a truing up, so to speak, in most situations. It's just if the delay is not excused, then there's a payment.
And you pay X.
Right. With actual damages, you would have to prove it. You would have to say, here's my receipt from the storage place. Here's, the vendor charging me more to make this in 2028 instead of 2026. Here's my, internal project management team's cost for an extra X number of months or what have you. Here's the AE monthly CA type costs. Here's, you go through this whole thing. And I would say the majority are pretty typical, but every third job, there's something bizarre that, I never would have expected. That's an actual real cost to the owner. And that's why owners particularly public owners, like liquidated damages, because then they don't have to go around and get all the cost. And if they've tried to estimate it reasonably well, courts usually give them the benefit of the doubt. If it's not, a $2 million bridge over a road that nobody goes on and has a $100,000 a day liquidated damages, that's ridiculous. But, a couple $100, $1,000, no one's going to look twice about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so the liquidated seems a lot cleaner. And then you don't have disputes over what that actual damage is, right? Because you're saying, okay, well, now my architecture fee is still continuing, and you're like, oh, yeah, but you would still be having an architect here for punch list, and you would still be doing this, so that's only 90%. And it just gets messy, right?
So when you have a delay and cost associated with it, whether it's from the contractor side or the owner side, you have to prove that there was an actual delay. You have to prove who was responsible for it, and then you have to prove what the costs are. Liquidated damages takes that third one out and says we're not going to argue about it.
Okay. So do you think it's a useful tool?
I think it's a useful tool. I think certainly in design, bid, build, it's standard. Certainly in the public space and many of the private projects that are out there, I think people like it because even contractors like it, because I know I've talked to contractors that say, if I have a liquidated damage of $5,000 a day, but to accelerate it's going to cost me $10,000 a day, they can do that. There's an argument about whether they can be ordered to accelerate, but if you explain, hey, you're only entitled to $5,000. You want me to pay $10,000 a month? That doesn't sound too reasonable. I think a lot of owners will say, okay, is there a different way to get around this? Because we both want to get to that point, and maybe you're right there. So I think that it gives a sort of a number that people can sort of bend off of in how they make their decisions later on.
So you wrote an interesting piece, Paul Greasy, who had mentioned a while back, says, hey, you should maybe have Greg on the podcast, and you should check out his stuff. So I started following you on LinkedIn, and what kind of got me interested in having the conversation a little more than even just Paul's recommendation was your piece on delay costs. And, you outlined what I felt like is a pretty good approach to, on the front end, determine what those costs are. And were you implying that you think that maybe that should just be agreed upon between both parties up front? Or,
well, I mean,
I guess what's your thought on the right way to handle delays?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are a public owner, I think, there isn't a reason not to use liquidated damages, right? It's simple. You're going to spend less time arguing about what the actual impact of the delay, if it happens, is. And, the one, I'll say tripwire is you do have to give it some level of thought process, right? And I know that there's public entities out there that just take a number and say, project's $10 million, so it's going to be $4,000. Project's $20 million, it's going to be, double that sort of thing. Is that okay? I work for the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Roads and bridges, it's the biggest cost is the cost to the traveling public. So if you're on 95 or 91 or 84, it's going to be a lot different than if you're on, Smith Street in some small town.
When you're brought in, you have a project where something has gone wrong. There's probably, some shared responsibility. I can't imagine it's very often that you come out and say, oh, this is 100% this person's
That's correct.
fault. Even like, hey, as a third party looking at this, like, wow, yeah, they're completely wrong, right? There's always some gray area in there. Like, what's the right approach for a contractor or an owner or a subcontractor? Something's gone wrong. There's going to be some shared responsibility here. What are the steps and what are the things they should do to, to remedy the situation? What would you tell folks that are in that position? Like, what are maybe some first things to do? What are some good practices? What's the right approach when you do, unfortunately, if you haven't followed all those good practices and you're in that position, what would you say to them?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. I think that a number of things. One is when you know the issue is arising, it's going to happen, it did happen, and you can start to estimate what the effect is from a cost point of view, from a schedule point of view, from whatever other aspect it is. I think you need to get your decision makers involved, right? Something above the PX in most companies. And you just need to sit down and talk it through, but not talk it through as if you're all cheerleaders and, we're going to screw the other guy and they're 100% wrong and, oh my God, can you believe this? But actually play devil's advocate. Ask yourself, what's their best argument? And see if it resonates with somebody. Sometimes your higher-ups that aren't knowing every little bit of the project will say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound too unreasonable, okay? And if that's the case, which I would say, as you said, most of these are not 100% or zero. They're somewhere in between. Maybe that's a very simple sign that trying to resolve this thing, not, getting your pelt, getting your drop of blood, is going to be the best way to resolve these things. I think that, of course, it takes two to tango. So if the other side is, nope, you're all wrong, we're not paying a thing, or, we won't take anything less than 100% of what we've asked for, it's difficult in those situations. But I think that, one of the things I've always enjoyed about the construction industry is that people are very pragmatic. And I can just tell you the time and the effort that contractors and owners, subcontractors get involved with when something goes to litigation. Many say, gosh, I just didn't realize how disruptive it was. I didn't realize I had to keep pulling these guys off their job to come in and talk for a whole day about what happened 5 years ago and why their email from 2021 said this, right? And they don't remember. It takes a lot of time and effort. So I'm actually, it may sound strange as a claims consultant that I'm saying settle your things, through reasonable discussion during the project. Happy to help on the back end, near the back end, but I think that if you have a willing partner on the other side of the table, make your best deal and move forward. One thing I think, and maybe we could add this back to the piece where we were talking earlier about contractual up front, is another clause that I always used to advocate for was escalated dispute resolution. So, project manager, they're the ones that are in the thick of it. Their opinions oftentimes are not going to gel, and they're not going to bend. PX is a little less so, but maybe a little bit more higher level. When you get to the next level, we used to write it in and say, if the project management team can't resolve it, each party can be notified, and regional manager, whatever the next level up was at both sides of the dispute would have a meeting. And then we would say, this isn't going to be a 10-hour meeting. It doesn't have, exhibits or anything. But, obviously the side is going to let their, regional guy know, and he's going to say to them, yeah, I'm not sure that sounds so good on our part. Okay, let's see what we can try to do. And there's a business piece of it, not just the facts. And then if that doesn't work, maybe it goes up to a COO or someone like that maybe sees those guys have been around a lot, and a lot of times they say, why are we fighting this? Is this mission critical? Is this, going to break the company if we don't get this? If it is, and I've been in many of those situations where they have to fight.
You got to fight. Yep.
But there's a lot more that are not in that situation, and they may realize, okay, I know the project manager's going to be probably pissed off, but we're just settle this thing.
Yeah, because I think I like that approach, right? It takes the personality and the
emotion,
pre-existing emotions out of it, right? And then from there, it obviously would go to, arbitration or whatever the clause you have.
Whatever the contract is. And then, you get people like myself, or you get attorneys involved, and there's, I think everyone knows there's costs involved with them, but they can be sizable. I mean, I had one job that finished up last year, and I think we were contracted to start looking at it 7 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it was a big job. It was a very complex thing, but, the fees were kind of ridiculous on that one.
Yeah. Would you tell people technically to do anything? Should you start looking at, looking back through your schedules? Were your look aheads aligning with are there any technical things you would tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple of them from the scheduling side of things. It kind of amazes me when contractors submit schedules every month and there's no response, or there's maybe a meeting and they say, it looks okay, but I think you have this date wrong. Well, are you actually reviewing it? Do you conceptually agree that they've changed that logic? Maybe they told you, maybe they didn't. That date is slid. That things of that nature. There should be something, and what I always advocated for was, as the owner, you say, we want to meet, and here's our agenda. And maybe you just have 5 bullet points. Maybe you have 2 bullet points. Maybe you have 20 bullet points that you say, I want to talk about this move, this duration expanded. I want to understand that. Now, some contractors will explain that all in their narrative, and that's, I won't say rare, but less than typical. But oftentimes, owners should be looking at it. And again, this sets a little bit of a record if there is a thing that goes south. And in the moment, more importantly, it says to the contractor, hey, we're looking at your schedule, and we're not sure we understand this. Now, maybe you have a meeting and they go, oh, okay, I understand that. I understand that. Okay, but this one we don't agree with. We don't agree with this one. And then at least both parties know it. So that would be one thing. I think from a project management point of view, organization, I just tell you, when we get to litigation, we usually ask for all the emails, and we end up looking through them. It's so much easier when people just simply have folders for each project or for each issue on the project, because that just speeds the time and saves a lot of money, because we're not just searching and trying to find it. We just say, okay, the guy that was on the job for 3 years and knows everything about it, he said all these were important, because maybe they didn't have the right keyword, right? That sort of thing, or they weren't to the right person. So, it's easier to do it. It takes you 5 or 10 minutes a day to, as something comes in, do it. And there's even automated ways you can do it in Outlook or Gmail. That helps, because then when you have, what I used to do is when you go for the change order review, well, you've got each of your change orders in a separate folder, and you can pop it up and say, oh, no, you said this, or you said that, or I sent it on this date, because those things always come up, and unless you really organized. That stuff oftentimes prevents disputes down the road, because they get nipped in the bud.
I'm going to spring one on you now, because I usually put it on the list when I send it over to the folks, but for whatever reason, I forgot to put it onto yours. I ask every guest, what do you think we'll see more of in the next 2, 5, 10 years? You pick, or what do you think we'll see less of moving forward? And it's a very open-ended kind of question, but I'm always interested when people sit in a different position, how they kind of view things. And you could answer both, you could answer one, but where do you kind of see us going as an industry?
I think, for me not to say AI is going to have an impact, it'd be kind of me putting my head in the sand. I think it's going to meet its promise of really changing things and providing real-time information and doing a lot of the jobs that are repetitive. Problem in our industry is, every job's a little bit unique, but certain aspects of it, can be can be mechanized or AI can take care of. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. I tend to be, as much as I like the idea of it, in some regards, I think it's going to take a long time for the construction industry. I think you're going to see the big companies, start meaningfully implementing it, and not for HR or for meeting minutes or things like that.
Marketing or something.
But when you start to see, a Suffolk or a Turner using it in estimating, or a variety of other aspects that are meaningful into how the project gets done, scheduling, for example. But I think that's probably, if you were to say, is it over or under 5 years? I think it's over 5 years. What am I going to see less of? I'd love to say people trying to have to win fights, disputes, litigation. I'm actually in the process of writing a paper on what motivates people to settle construction disputes, and many of them are probably not very good motivations. I've seen it all. So I'm a big advocate for make the best deal you can during the job, and you'll save yourself a lot of headache. And maybe some of them will be second guessed later, but the majority of them will be good decisions and then move forward. So I would hope that there would be less, but I tend to think that it'll continue to slowly increase the I mean, I don't fear for a lack of work for me. There's plenty of disputes out there, but I think some of them could be avoided very easily. So I'd love to say that, but I'm not sure. I don't know. That's kind of tough. You did spring it on me.
I was just about to say, you did a pretty good job for someone who got that question cold in the moment. But I'd love to see that white paper.
Yeah.
If you share it with me when you're done, that's just fascinating from like a human nature standpoint. I'd be curious what happens. And I appreciate you coming out, and I'm sure people listening got a bunch of nuggets. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg.